Thank you, Michael. Well, good morning and welcome home, Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River. Welcome to those in our sanctuary this morning and for those joining us on Zoom as we begin a new church year with traditional services together. Time is passing so quickly. Was it really 13 weeks ago that we sat here before Memorial Day thinking, anticipating summer? And didn't we fill it with all kinds of family and friends and activities, whatever challenged you, whatever delighted you during those months? Take a pause this morning, take a breath, and may we find renewal and peace in this hour that we spend together. In this morning's ingathering, let us be grateful for all that continues to support and nurture and for the blessings that we share. Gratitude for the breath that you are breathing right now, that one. Gratitude for the person by your side, for the memories that warm our hearts. By our gathering, we bless each other and this place, and in its shelter, we are blessed in return. My name is Annie Lavin, and I am your service leader. This morning is return after summer months when some of us were away for long periods, short periods of time. No matter, each Sunday, the chalice was lit with you in our hearts as we had discussions, wonderful discussions, led by many of you who are in the sanctuary this morning. Our theme this September is the gift of welcome, and today we're exploring that theme through the lens of being open to everything that our faith calls us to be. One of those calls is to be willing to do things that might be different as we engage and welcome and ensure people that they are truly welcome in our lives, in our space, even when it might be a challenge for us. We are pleased that Reverend Paul Boothby is again in our pulpit with us this morning and joining in this service. He is a UU minister recently retired to Talbot County with his wife, Krista. He will deliver a sermon on the courage to evolve. He reminds us that science and spirituality both teach us there is nothing unchanging in the universe, and that includes our Unitarian Universalist faith, which has evolved over the years and continues to do so. Are we up for that? So the questions will include, are we prepared to live into a larger love that this movement is embodying today? We look forward to hearing this and to the discussion that will follow. Our musician, Michael Casey, is accompanying us this morning on lovely pieces composed by Bach and Smetana. And during the offering, he is going to be singing and playing Welcome Home. So we thank him for that. Pardon me? Coming home. Coming home. Thank you. And that's great. Thank you, Michael, for that. And gratitude for all those who helped with the service this morning. Your names are in the order of service. So for announcements, I'm just going to ask you to read reflections. It's all in there, but I'm going to talk about two things that are coming up, both on the same weekend in 2 weeks. September 22nd is a Friday, and we're going to have a German-themed potluck down at the Memorial Garden, German food and music, and well, come on down, you'll just love it. And then 2 days later, after service here on the 24th, we're going to have a meeting to approve funds for the new HVAC air conditioning unit and dehumidifier for some of the church areas. So we'll need your voice and your vote. And now, let us begin. We will have the chalice lighting. The words are in your order of service, and they're going to be led by Reverend Paul as I light the chalice.
Please join with me. The flame of our chalice this morning is a symbol of the warmth and brightness of our connections. The flame lights our way back together again from our separate summer lives, and it lights our way forward in this new church year of promise and renewal.
And now Reverend Paul and I are going to be doing a shared reading. It's written by David Blanchard, and it's called Come Down Off That Ladder.
Come down off that ladder. Wash out that paintbrush. Shake the sand out of your shoes. Get up off your muddy knees and give the garden a morning off.
Fold up the newspaper, turn off your coffee pot, set aside your phone, and close up your computer and calendar, already filled with dates and times and people and places that claim you.
This church is ready for you to fill its rooms, to create its spirit, to generate its warmth, to kindle its light. This church is ready for you to make community, to create beauty, to bend it toward justice, and serve its ideals.
This church is ready for you to be here, honoring our past, invigorating our present, and dreaming of our future. This is our church. Here we are home. Here we are whole. May it be. Well, for opening words, we all know that Labor Day has come and gone. September is here, and the rhythms of the seasons continue. Today, at this ingathering, we begin our 31st year as Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, with a rich history reflecting all that has brought us to this moment in time. From those early worship services that some of us remember held at Washington College, 1992 it all began, to moving later to the beloved Quaker Meeting House, to the purchase of this lot on Gateway in 2002, and then on to building the church and our first service in 2006. In ingathering, we also take a moment to remember all of the good people, all who have come through our doors, including each one of you. So many we grew to love and then lost. And yet each is still a part of the fabric of this faith community. I am awed and humbled remembering dear faces from the past and hearing voices long silenced, laughter, and the creative spirit and deeds of so many, which in turn we are now building upon as we live our UU principles and are the liberal religious presence in this community. That was the dream of Peter Tapke, our benefactor. We are fulfilling the dream. This year, we have a new board. MQ Riding is our president. Terry Goldzier is our treasurer. Jane Hardy, who's in Ireland, is our secretary. Joy Kim, Les Palmer, and Connie Schroth are the trustees. Into their hands, we are entrusting the leadership of this beloved community in 2023, 2024. And so, like waters returning to the sea, we return to this church and each other to be renewed and refreshed as we continue the important work we do. Welcome as we start our 31st year. I'll close with the words of Michael Schuler. If you're proud of this church, become its advocate. As we look ahead to the future, share its message. If its values resonate deep within you, give it a measure of your devotion. So may it be. Our first hymn this morning is number 145, As Tranquil Streams, in the gray hymnal.
Please rise.
Please stand as you are able. Thank you, everyone. And now a time for centering with Reverend Boothby.
I offer these words adapted from the work of Kenneth Patton, Universalist minister. We arrive from many singular streams, flowing together over the branching rivers of our lives. We come to be assured that siblings surround us, to restore their images on our eyes. We come to enlarge our voices in common speaking and singing. We try again that solitude found in the midst of those who, with us, seek their hidden reckonings. Our eyes reclaim the remembered faces. Their voices stir the surrounding air. The warmth of their hands assures us, and the gladness of our spoken name. This is the reason of cities, of homes, of assemblies in the houses of worship. It is good to be with one another. Annie.
And now for acknowledgements of the heart. This is our time when we grow community as we listen with our hearts to the joys and the sorrows and the misfortunes and all of life that each of us might bring to each other today. So if you'll come to the mic, I will light a candle.
Got my candle, thank you. For those of you who haven't heard, about a week and a half ago, my mother fell in her closet and tore the skin of her forearm, requiring 31 stitches. And she's doing well. It's healing as well as you might expect at that age. And we did play some ping pong last night, so she's up and about. She wanted to be here this morning, but she got an invite to Twinnies for breakfast, and apparently there's a pancake that's on her bucket list up there. So she sends her regrets.
I'd just like to share the joy that I trucked up to Philadelphia and was hovering as little as possible over my daughter for some surgery, which she would not appreciate if I shared the surgery, because she thinks her mother is in her face and hovering way too much. But everything went great. And there's something about when you have a kid, you inhale and you don't know quite if you'll ever exhale again, worrying about the harm that comes to them. So I'm so grateful for all the skilled people that helped her through that and the discipline to not hover too much for her mother.
Yesterday was the wedding of one of my brothers and his now wife. So I wish the best to both of them in their new life.
Thank you. Actually, I have a joy and a sorrow. 7 weeks ago, I fell and thought I dislocated my shoulder. Turns out that I just tore the muscle in my arm, and I was laid up for 6 weeks. I tried to come to church one time and got halfway up the steps, ramp, and I had to turn around and go home because I was in so much pain. And so that was my sorrow. For 6 weeks, I was either on the couch or laying in bed with the heating pad and so on. But, it's another story. That's sorrow. My joy today is to say that I'm able to walk, get to church, which I've missed so much, and I could feel it in my body that I missed it and needed to be here. And I can walk up here today because my shoulder doesn't hurt anymore, and I'm able to get around a little bit, so that's my joy. So thank you.
These seats are making me smile. It reminds me of my old classrooms. And then I moved my desk right up close, so didn't work. One other sorrow that comes to my mind is what's on the news this morning, and that's the situation, well, there's many situations, but the one in Morocco where the earthquake has just killed millions and harmed millions, and it's just devastating. So, and there were aftershocks last night, so more damage. I'm going to light this final candle for any joy or concern that you hold in your heart this morning in silence. Blessed be. And now is the time for the offering, when we will pass the baskets and Michael Casey will be singing. Let me get this mic to him. We do have two mics, but it's not set up. This is happening.
Technology is not our friend.
And the blood will dry underneath my nails, and the wind will rise up to fill my sails. So you can doubt and you can hate, but I know no matter what it takes, I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home. Let the rain wash away all the pain of yesterday. I know my kingdom awaits in the forgiving my mistakes. I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming. Still far away from where I belong, but it's always darkest before the storm. So you can doubt and you can hate, but I know no matter what it takes, I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home. Let the rain wash away all the pain of yesterday. I know my kingdom awaits in the forgiving my mistakes. I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming. I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home. Let the rain wash away all the pain of yesterday. I know my kingdom awaits and they've forgiven my mistakes. I'm coming home, I'm coming home. Tell the world I'm coming home.
Thank you, Michael. And now, Reverend Boothby.
Thank you, Annie. Deeper than DNA, more fundamental than molecules or quarks, at our living core, we are wholeness and transfiguring love. We often forget that power, becoming lonely and resentful, comparing ourselves to others, acting out of our fears rather than living our glory. Occasionally, we rouse from our trance to remember our wholeness. For a time, we embody unsentimental love. We make efforts to wake others and to remain fully present. That is the work of our faith. Our lives and our time here together are made sacred by our striving. For this hour and for the rest of our lives, may we be more aware of the spirit of life evolving through us and among us. That's just by way of introduction, because this morning I want to talk about evolution, but not about diatoms and dinosaurs and Darwin, but I want to talk about the evolution of the people, how changes in the social environment prompt changes in the culture, and how waves of cultural change tend to also evoke heated resistance. We are living through it today. New cultural assumptions are spreading, and they are being resisted. Although the particulars seem to define this age, this process echoes through history. And so perhaps we can learn from the past. Let us look back, for example, to the life of Giordano Bruno. Born in 1548 outside Naples, Italy, Bruno had the privilege of formal studies in philosophy, logic, theology, a conventional education to prepare him for life in the holy orders. But Bruno came to some unconventional realizations that were deemed heresy by the church. He was threatened with imprisonment, and so he had to go into hiding in Rome and then Paris, and he even got a frosty reception at Oxford. And then after seeking refuge in Geneva, he proved too radical for the Protestants. Because you see, at the time, aside from maybe Transylvania and southern Poland, Europe in general in the 16th century was no safe haven for people who, like Bruno, denied the doctrine of the Trinity, denied the divinity of Jesus, or who denied the doctrine of hell. But it wasn't just his theology that the Catholic and Protestant establishments objected to. You see, Bruno also published some very important cosmological and astronomical theories that were also considered too radical, too revolutionary. He was following, of course, in the footsteps of Copernicus, who had written some years earlier that the earth is not the center of the universe, but revolved around the sun, along with the other planets. But Copernicus had not taken his ideas as far as they could go. So a generation later, along comes Bruno saying, not only is the earth not the center of the universe, but neither is the sun. In fact, ours is just one of an uncountable number of planetary systems in one of an unimaginable number of galaxies. And there are probably other planets out there like ours. His observations and his calculations were to him a revelation. And so Bruno also insisted that the Bible may teach us moral values, but should not be looked to for its astronomical implications. Well, that didn't go down too well. Because if a few observations and calculations could change how people think about how the universe works, if the whole truth of life is not in the Bible, well, then maybe God isn't all powerful, and maybe the church isn't the ultimate authority on earth. Church leaders of all stripes feared social chaos, so they resisted. For Copernicus, that meant that his book was put on the Vatican's Index of Forbidden Works until 1835. And when Bruno went even further than Copernicus, the Vatican burned him alive at the stake in 1600. Yeah. Now, if anyone ever asks you why there was no formal Unitarian or Universalist movement in Western Europe around that time, you can tell them that murder was a significant hindrance. And even as Bruno's work sealed his fate with the church, It also forced the scientific community to come to terms with these theories as they were confirmed by observation and calculation. It was a turning point for secular cosmological thought. The consensus began to shift. The evidence could no longer be ignored, particularly with the later work of Kepler and Galileo. The cosmology of Aristotle was dead. And after Bruno, the Western world had to face the fact that we are not the center of the universe, but must come to know ourselves as one of many points in a much more complicated cosmos that does not exist for our benefit alone. This was big stuff. It was a turbulent time. And now we too are in a turbulent time. But unlike the one inspired by Copernicus, Bruno, Kepler, and others, this is not a revolution of science, but a blowing apart of cultural assumptions long held by the dominant majority. The shift we see today is one in which certain Americans, who for generations have been raised to see ourselves because of inherited attributes as the center of everything, can no longer have the luxury of thinking ourselves as the default normative perspective on human experience. This is the progress that recent years have demanded of us, and what our study of anti-racism has reinforced. It is an evolution of principles advocated in prior generations when people demanded that Black folks be entitled to equal protection before the law. The 20th century, in a way, saw a Copernican shift in American culture, which brought about civil rights, equal access, the right to vote. Those days were hard, and yet the work was not finished. Because, you see, not only is our sun not the center of the universe, but there is no center of the universe, and all the millions of beings in all those galaxies also have experiences as valid as ours. We are each one precious miracle among billions of other miraculous variations on the human story, all with inherent worthiness, all with something to contribute to the story of humankind. We live in a post-Bruno era. The truth is all around us, and yet it is still resisted. And so we must work to make real the norm that Black lives do matter. We must accept LGBTQ lives as equally normative, to see autism and other forms of neurodivergence as valuable parts of the human experience, to reject the culture of sexual harassment, exploitation, and patriarchy. The truth has been revealed, and there is no going back. And so we must also come to terms with the fact that our institutions, our laws, our customs developed within a culture in which white men were at the center. That is, white, cisgender, straight, affluent, able-bodied, neurotypical men were seen as the norm. This age demands that we ask, what would our institutions look like if they were shaped by the needs and priorities of everyone? All the traits that have historically marked privilege in our society are being de-centered. We who carry any of these traits must come to know ourselves as one of many points in a much more complicated cosmos that does not exist for our benefit alone. This new cosmic paradigm does have quite a few people feeling quite uncomfortable. And some are fighting back against the march of history. Indeed, they're fighting about how we teach history. They're fighting over who gets to be at the center of the story. And that's why we saw such a backlash against efforts like the 1619 Project, which told the story of our country's history from the perspective of Black Americans. This simple narrative gesture was experienced as revolutionary because for generations, the stories and perspectives of marginalized groups were, well, marginalized, not given the same validity and weight as those who were in places of privilege and power. That is changing. And we need to keep it up. And that's why I'm so glad things are happening, like the state of Maryland now celebrates International Underground Railroad Month every September, centering the stories of people who escaped the bondage of slavery and those who helped them. And we are centering more and more the story of emancipation itself, with celebrations of Juneteenth, bringing it to the center of our collective story. I celebrate this emerging perspective, the broadening of the circle of inclusion, because I see it as in full harmony with our Unitarian Universalist principles, in which we affirm that all lives have inherent worth and dignity. Everyone deserves a voice in matters that affect them, and all cultures have something to teach us about the human condition. This is a time when our inquisitive and boldly loving faith will be well placed to speak to the emerging social realities of America. And it just so happens that this paradigm shift in the larger culture, this post-Bruno reality emerging around us, comes at a time when Unitarian Universalists are reflecting deeply as a movement on our guiding principles. You may have heard about the Article 2 Study Commission, or maybe you haven't, that's okay. But Article 2 is the part of our denominational bylaws that contains our purposes and principles and sources of inspiration, those that are printed in the front of the gray hymnal. And these have served us well. But the time is at hand when we must reflect deeply on whether they still offer the kind of guidance we need as a religious movement at a time when this emerging social reality is changing all around us. Reflecting together on our guiding principles is a process that we as a movement go through about every generation. Our forebears understood that enforced conformity of belief has been the root of much religious violence and so is inherently destructive to religion. So we don't use a creed. We don't define what all Unitarian Universalists must believe. But we do pause about every generation or so to consider together how to articulate our values in terms that are relevant to the reality of our time. We change. because there's always room for improvement. This is part of what defines us as a liberal religion, a commitment to a faith that is informed by experience. Now, the last time we adopted new principles was 1984. And these principles were a great step forward in the use of gender-neutral language and a generally more inclusive orientation. It was good stuff. But times change, and over the years, we added a sixth source and an eighth principle. We've actually made so many proposals over the years that the UUA leadership appointed a commission to study Article 2 more deeply, to collect input from UUs across the country and come back with recommendations that could be sent out to the congregations. And that study commission's report was delivered to the UUA board in January, discussed online and in gatherings and at our General Assembly in June. In fact, by the time it got to General Assembly in Pittsburgh, there were already hundreds of proposed amendments. I think, therefore, whereas. That is our way. Some of those amendments were accepted by our delegates in Pittsburgh, and so the study commission has been charged with incorporating those amendments that passed at General Assembly, working them into a new proposal to bring forth next June, which General Assembly next June will be an online event, so even more of us can participate. And we've given you this morning sorry, I lost my place. Anyway, a copy of the current version of those amended proposal. Now it is in our hands to look at these results of so many years of work, to understand how these proposals might form a better statement of who we are and where we stand as we enter the middle of the 21st century. And you can see there is more to this proposal than we can explore in one worship service. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, I promise. But I thought it would be important for you to have it to take home and study, along with the thousands of other UUs across the country who are also engaging in this. But for today, I wanted to draw your attention to section C 2.2, because that's the part that essentially takes the place of our current principles. The proposal is to name these as values and to make them more explicitly the subject of our covenantal relationship with each other, with other UU congregations, and with the heart of our faith movement. Let me read a bit of it aloud, where it says, as Unitarian Universalists, we covenant, congregation to congregation, and through our association, to support and assist one another in our ministries. And we draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Now, what I like about this is that it reminds us that although freedom and reason and hope and courage are important values, they are essentially modifiers for the foundational value of love, the power that animates all we do. I think it's interesting that the principles from 1984 did not place love as a central motivating force. Love is mentioned, for sure, as an element among our sources of inspiration, that words and deeds of prophetic people challenge us to confront structures of evil with the transforming power of love, and Jewish and Christian teachings that call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Love comes across as essentially a tool. that we might use if it seems appropriate. But love is more than a tool in our toolbox. It is the living heart from which all our other principles are manifestations. Respecting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, the goal of world community. These are all things we want to do, but their nature is an outgrowth of a single mysterious and powerful force that flows through us when we open ourselves to it, when we give ourselves as windows through which it may shine. The principles are our love made manifest. So love has always been implicit in our movement, like the way the revelations of science were always a functional source of inspiration for our forebears, even if it was not part of their formal statements until recent generations. Love has always been at the core of our movement. And now this proposed Article 2 lifts up and acknowledges the lived reality of what we've been doing all along. All our work for racial justice, all our work to save the planet, all our work of religious education and building community, pastoral ministry, strengthening our institutions, and our time of worship. These are all expressions of our commitment to love humanity, to love life, to love the web of existence of which we are a part. They're facets of the same shining gem. And that's a big deal, because to claim that love is the animating force behind all else we do is to set our sights very high indeed. And I think it is very timely, because we do hear more and more that Unitarian Universalists are craving a more intimate relationship with that which animates our spiritual lives, not to change the fundamental nature of our movement, but to practice it with more openness, more courage, even when it is difficult. That's what makes this a religious movement instead of just a social club. We do take this praxis of making our values real seriously. We're not perfect. We do make mistakes and lose our way. But that's what life in deep conversation with values looks like. It's challenging. It can be uncomfortable. And not unexpectedly, there are a few folks aggressively resisting this effort. And although they've been overwhelmingly outvoted, they continue to create conflict for the sake of conflict, it seems. They claim to be defending free speech, but are really often just in it for the fight. Speaking myself as a fifth-generation Unitarian Universalist, I know of many false conflicts over the generations that began simply as resistance to progress. Resistance to broadening the circle of inclusion, a fear, if you will, of our own evolution. These times we live in are as tough as we've ever seen, and it's natural to be anxious about change, especially when it involves something we hold so dear. But we must not be distracted from our commitment to love and justice. We are on a good path. And I believe that we must have the courage in this moment, in this generation, to actively evolve as a religious movement so that we can be what the world needs us to be, what our children need us to be in the years ahead. May it be so. Amen. Blessed be. Let us sing a hymn of hope in your gray hymnals. Oh, no, it's after the hymn.
It's number 159.
Yeah.
This is my song. Please stand as you are able. Did you have some special way? We were going to have a discussion on some of these ideas that we've received from Reverend Boothby. I'm interested in knowing how this is going to look as it touches our lives on a daily basis in the individual congregations. We think now that we're doing everything based on love, but if this is something new that the UUs are behind and really a main focus, what will we be asked to do?
Well, of course, that's yet to be determined because we've still got some, the work of bylaws is not quick. So, and I don't often preach on bylaws. It's not real sexy stuff. But I think what the meaning of this work for a lot of us is that it simply makes more explicit the animating motivation behind what we do. And it allows for a fuller or different expressions in worship and in our work in public witness to carry it out differently. And we have yet to see what that's going to look like. It's going to be, I think, a little bit more vocal. On occasion, it's going to look a little more excitable, a little less restrained perhaps, but it's the same impetus, I think. And of course, every congregation still will be defining for themselves what that looks like for you in this, for the folks in UUs of the Chester River. What does this mean? How does it impact our work and how we are together? I think it's an invitation to a place of deeper engagement, and which for some of our congregations is a big change. I think there are, I'm familiar with some congregations that over the years have been pretty lackadaisical about, oh yeah, principles, yeah, we like those, but we just like being together, and which is important. But there's more to it than that. We represent in our coming together something more than simply a reassuring presence for each other. We represent, I think, as you said early in the service, the liberal voice in the community. We're willing to speak a different perspective to the issues at hand. That's a start. I mean, again, this is all evolving, and it'll be interesting to see how it manifests in all our different some congregations are already, I don't know, adopting it in different ways. I'm not in touch with all the congregations around the country, but especially in retirement.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that thoughtful talk. It does expand the mind, and I've always thought it was really challenging to be a UU, just because we are not normal. And you use that word normal a lot in the beginning of your talk, because we do live this world in a bell curve, the scientific whatever, and human beings like to have a comfort zone and know what's expected of them and all that good stuff. Yet we are called to do differently. And we're not a typical church, but we're a church, I believe. And I just think that that challenge to be a UU is going to be even greater once we really fully express these things in a more concrete way, which I think is good.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, behind you.
I was grateful for my daughter's health earlier, and I'm also grateful that she's a Yale-trained linguist and a member of the LGBTQ community. And she keeps telling me that language always changes. Every language always changes. And I think it's such a wonderful universal truth that language is what we try to form to make sure we know what's going on. This is this. I mean, just the words. We try to nail down things because we all need stability. But in fact, whatever stability we build in language or in principles of our church always has to change. And I really appreciate that linking of change and courage that you made in your speech.
Thank you. Yes, I'm reminded of periods like the late 19th century when Unitarians and Universalists were struggling to, were coming into more conversation with the religions of the world and seeing themselves as part of a much larger conversation about, perceptions of truth and practice. And then early in the 20th century when humanism was coming into its own, and the conflict or the difficulty, the challenge around integrating the humanist perspective into what had essentially been a liberal Christian denomination, well, both of them, Unitarians and Universalists. And then I think about the 1990s when the pagans among us were asking for more of a voice and to be accepted, and that was a bit of a struggle. So it's not as if this process is anything new, and our language has had to adapt and expand to account for the newness and the changes.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. It's wonderful. We're swimming upstream with the concept of love, because it's innate in humans to hate with more passion than we love. If we only could have the same passion for love as for hatred, it would be a wonderful world.
I heard you say that Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religion. And I'm wondering, why do you ever consider Unitarian Universalism as a progressive religion? Using that adjective to more represent really more like what we really stand for.
I use the word liberal in the sense that it's been used historically in theological terms, that it's not specific to a political perspective. It's really specific to movements that are that do have as part of their premise the fact that they choose to evolve and adapt, and that they so it has a different, I mean, I know we hear the word liberal and with a particular meaning these days, but when it's used to describe religion, it's something different. And that, again, the problem of language. Progressive, I think, in conventional usage today, probably expresses more what folks would associate with what we are, in that we are trying to take steps forward all the time. We're trying to make progress in ourselves, in our communities, and in society at large. So, I mean, both terms are applicable. But yeah, so I hear what you're saying. It's my seminary training that gets in the way.
And I'm guessing what you mean is liberal in the sense of, for example, liberal arts,
Yes.
as opposed to the political liberalism.
Yeah, it grew out of the same lexicon, you know, historically.
Anyone else? Thank you so much. That was so good. And so much coming up. We'll be anxious to learn as we address more of this in the weeks to come. Our closing words. Mary Wood. Do you remember her? Wonderful woman. She and her husband, Harold, lived in Chestertown and Centerville for 60 plus years and did all kinds of wonderful things. She was also a poet. So I'm going to end on with this note. This was one of her poems about sailing. And she said, "It's Sunday, and there's no work, and there's no humidity, and everyone you hoped would go sailing with you can. A north wind breeze, chilled like Chardonnay, fills the sails. Downriver, Deep Point to starboard, the Corsica, Piney Point, the Hermitage Barn to port. We are flying like a seagull past old familiar landmarks and then jibing upriver again. 13 boats behind us, calls the youngest, and not a one ahead. The magic of sailing." Please join with me as I extinguish the chalice. The words are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, fire of commitment. These we can in our hearts until we And now our postlude, and Michael has some thoughts on this. Do you want my mic?
For the postlude, I'll be playing an excerpt of a piece called Die Moldau, which is a selection from a series of symphonic poems by Bedřich Smetana, a Czech composer from the Romantic era. The symphonic poems are meant to illustrate the beauty of the natural world of Bohemia and of Czech musical heritage. But interestingly enough, I've done some digging and I've found that the main melody that you'll hear in this, it illustrates a sort of kind of musical interconnection of cultures. This particular melody has been found in so many different incarnations in, let's see, I can name 3 other cultures off the top of my head. It's the melody to a Romanian folk song, an Italian folk song, and the Israeli national anthem as well. So if you recognize the main melody when it comes up, that's where it's from.
Can I just add one little thing, because I thought if I'm just learning more about classical.
So is the,
find this helpful when I
is
listen
the
to
service over?
people
The
think
music
this is
thing?
a national song.
Yep, he's a national hero in Czechia.
Is the service over? Yeah, pretty much.
In 1939.
I heard some of it. I felt falling asleep. Pretty honest. Yeah, it sounded really interesting.